Alright, if you are new here, you've never seen my face before, my name is Nada. I make YouTube videos about books, TV, movies, history, literally whatever I want to talk about. And if you've watched my channel before, if this isn't your first video with me, welcome back. I hope you have a great time. I hope you enjoy or think things about what I'm about to say in this video today. But basically, what's been happening, particularly that I've seen on Twitter, but then it just kind of like crossed into the mainstream media because of Rita Moreno's big mouth, is that there has been, let me start from the beginning. Lin-Manuel Miranda is releasing a movie version of his hit musical In the Heights, the Heights being Washington Heights in New York City. Like I've said before, I'm not Latin American. I am African from a Portuguese-speaking African country, so I've always had, this is like weird to say. I saw this tweet from this girl who's from Angola. I'm from Mozambique. She was talking about how like culturally there's more similarities between, say, like her and somebody from Brazil or her and somebody from Colombia, just like her and Latin American people, than there are between her and Black people from the US. Like the language is kind of similar, the foods are kind of similar, the cultures are kind of similar between Portugal and Spain, and even Brazil is a country in Latin America that was colonized by Portugal. Those similarities exist. I grew up in my house watching telenovelas because that was the only TV that my mom could understand for a really long time, because Spanish and Portuguese are so similar. My mom learned how to speak Spanish before she learned how to speak English because she was working, where she was working, those were the people that she could talk to when she immigrated to the US. So like I've always had this like kind of peripheral connection to and similarity with Latin American culture that has made me really interested in it. And oh yeah, also I'm just Black. Like more than anything cultural, more than anything language related, religion related, I am Black. So there's been a lot of things happening over the past few days that have really just made me like more and more angry as time has passed, and has like, just like on behalf of the Afro-Latino community, but also as a member of the Black diaspora, like as a Black person, I am like, how can you be treating human beings like this and speaking to them as if they're like stupid little children? Essentially, this whole conversation was kicked off by this interview that the director of the film In the Heights did with The Root's Feliz Leon. She is a Black Cuban contributor for The Root, and essentially the question that she asked him was, as a Afro-Latina, a Black Cuban, a Black person of Cuban descent, what do you say to the criticism people have about all of the principal actors in this film being light-skinned or white-passing Latinos? And I think there's not really like a satisfactory answer, and I think there can't be a satisfactory answer at this point. Like the movie has been filmed, shot, and is in the process of being released, you know. And so this conversation is kind of a conversation that's happening to what end exactly? But I think the end is for there to be better representation of Afro-Latino, Black Latina people in media in general. Based off of everything that I've ever heard about Washington Heights, my understanding about Washington Heights, and even as a student of history, the demographics of Latino people who I understand to live there are very different from what's represented within the principal cast and even within a lot of the background actors of the film. But I've been thinking for the past few days about, like, I listened to this podcast called The Read, and one of the hosts used to live in Washington Heights, and she's Black, brown-skinned Black. Like, if you would know that she's Black if you looked at her. And she said that whenever she would walk around in Washington Heights, people would walk up to her speaking Spanish because they just assumed that she could speak Spanish because of where she lived. It's so, Black people who speak Spanish are so normal in Washington Heights that you could walk up to a random Black person and assume that they could speak Spanish and be right more times than you aren't. And I say that as somebody who, I grew up in a city that is like majority Latin American immigrants from like Central America, and they don't speak to me in Spanish. They never assume that I can speak Spanish. Can I speak Spanish? I can understand what they're trying to say to me. Could I respond to them in a way that they would understand? That's debatable. But like, they never, ever, ever assume that I speak Spanish. And that's because the racial demographics in Central America are a lot different than they are in the Caribbean, Latin American islands. And this is because of history, because of this little thing that we call slavery. So yeah, most of the people, or a significant number of the people who live in Washington Heights and are of Latin American descent are Black Latin American people. And so that is where this criticism and this conversation is coming from. It's coming from people who are informed about that neighborhood in New York City, and people who know that it looks like them and their families and their siblings and not the people that are being portrayed on screen. So I want to start off by talking about the two things that made me the angriest in this situation, and then also talk about why I was angry as someone who I'm not Afro-Latino, I'm not from Latin America, but I just want to talk about those two things. The first thing that pissed me off, one of the actresses who plays Vanessa Morales is played by Melissa Barrera, a Mexican telenovela actress. And when she was asked in the same Root interview as John M. Chu about the lack of Afro-Latino representation in the film.
I think it's important to note, though, that in the audition process, which was a long audition process, there were a lot of Afro-Latinos there, a lot of darker skinned people. And I think they were looking for just the right people for the roles, for the person that embodied each character in the fullest extent. And I think we are all very much like our characters because the cast ended up being us. And Washington Heights is a melting pot of Black and Latinx people. John and Lynn wanted the dancers and the big numbers to feel very truthful to what the community looks like.
So here's a couple of problems that I have with that. First of all, Melissa Barrera is Mexican. And as I said earlier, Washington Heights is mainly made up of Latin immigrants from the Caribbean. That's not to say that there are no Mexican people living in Washington Heights, but she's definitely playing a character who is probably Dominican or Puerto Rican, which means that she definitely took a job from somebody who is talented and could have played that role as a Dominican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Afro-Latino person. That's just a fact. Do I think she was cast because she has connections in the Latin America media sphere? I don't know. Maybe. Do I think she was cast because she's been in telenovelas and she's a recognizable face in Latin America and that would sell the movie in that market? I don't know. Maybe. These are just things that I'm saying. I'm not gonna claim anything for I'm just saying, like, is it necessarily that the most talented people got cast in this movie, or is it that the people who they thought would be the most marketable got cast in this movie? Because being completely honest, like, talent, fitting for the role, it doesn't really matter in terms of like movie casting as much as like, is this face recognizable? Will people buy tickets if they see that this person is in this movie? Can we sell this in international markets if we put this character in this movie? Like, all of that is a consideration. Second of all, she said Washington Heights is a melting pot of Black and Latinx people. So what that statement assumes is that Black people cannot also be Latinx. And I know that that seems so innocent, but saying small things like that exclude the Afro-Latino people from their community. I mean, I'm sure there's also Black people from the United States who live in Washington Heights, like the girl who hosted the podcast who I was talking about earlier, but like within the Latinx community, there are a lot of Black people as well. They're not mutually exclusive, especially coming from the perspective of somebody who isn't from, let's say, like Brazil or Haiti or Dominican Republic, or in any place where there is like a visible amount of Black people who are not immigrants, are not tourists, like have centuries long history in those countries. Coming from her, she's from Mexico. Like there's not a huge community of Black people in Mexico. There just isn't. They're there. They exist. And we can't discount their existence, but the media in Mexico does not have representation of the Black people that live in Mexico. So I can understand her coming from where she's from, especially from a privileged background. A lot of people, I think, have this assumption that there are no Black people in Latin America, or that Black people are automatically a minority in Latin America. And that's really just not the case. I want to talk about the thing that really made me just be like, I have to sit down and film this video. So basically, Rita Moreno, who I used to love, went on Stephen Colbert's late night show and herself brought up the criticism that the film In the Heights is facing for its lack of representation of Afro-Latino people. And I'll put in the clip of what she said.
Can we talk for a second about that criticism about Lin-Manuel? That really upsets me.
For the people who don't know, your friend and ours, Lin-Manuel Miranda, there's been some criticism for the lack of Afro-Latino people in The Heights, the movie adaptation of his play.
I mean, it's like
what do you make of that?
You can never do right, it seems. This is the man who literally has brought Latino-ness and Puerto Rican-ness to America. I couldn't do it. I mean, I would love to say I did, but I couldn't. Lin-Manuel has done that really single-handedly, and I'm thrilled to pieces, and I'm proud that he produced my documentary.
And so are you saying that while you may understand where people's concerns come from, that perhaps it's misplaced in criticizing him in this?
Well, I'm simply saying, can't you just wait a while and leave it alone? There's a lot of people who are Puerto Riqueño, who are also from Guatemala, who are dark and who are also fair. We are all colors in Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. And this is how it is, and it would be so nice if they hadn't come up with that and left it alone just for now. I mean, they're really attacking the wrong person.
Essentially, what I got from it is that she said, "Shut up, darkies. It's not your turn yet." She said, "Sit down, you Negroes. It is not your turn right now." That's what Miss Rita said. She said, I don't want to hear it from the darkies today. Like, I was floored. I wasn't surprised. As an older, white, Latina woman, I'm not surprised at all that this is the attitude that she has towards representation of Afro-Latino people in, like, large media. But I was like, damn, she really dug that grave. She really was like, I'm going to say this. Like, it is important to me that I say this. Ooh. It was bad. Racist rhetoric that if it was coming from a white American would be completely unacceptable, as it should be. And people would be like so upset. The same thing comes out of the mouth of a white Latino person or like mixed race, mestizo Latino person, and nobody bats an eyelash. Like, it's not that nobody bats an, like, Afro-Latino people are mad, reasonably, but it's like, people don't get called out the same way. And so I think it's important to point out that racism when it happens, because first of all, it is racism. And second of all, I think we take, because of how dominant the US culture is in the world and in the Western Hemisphere, I think we take for granted that racial dynamics play out the same way across the entire hemisphere. And that's just not the truth. It's just not the truth. In Puerto Rico, Rita Moreno is a white woman. In Mexico, Melissa Barrera is a white woman. Like, there is such thing as white Latino people. People whose grandparents immigrated to Latin America from Germany. People who have conquistador blood running in their bodies from the 1500s to today. And they are white. and they identify as such when they are in their home countries. But when they come to the United States, because of a unique mix of racial and ethnic dynamics, they cease to be white because the US others people who don't have English as a first language automatically. I've heard Rita Moreno talk about this all the time, talk about how important it is for her to see Latino representation, and talk about how important it is for Latinos to be in the forefront in US media. And that nugget of it is clearly very important to her, because as a person who is entering acting and singing and dancing and musicals when she was in like the 50s and 60s, as a Latino woman in the US, that was probably incredibly difficult for her. There's a reason that she's playing, who is she playing in West Side Story? Not Maria. She's playing the friend who isn't Maria. I don't remember what her name is right now. There's a reason that she's playing that character, and a white American woman is playing Maria, the Puerto Rican character, because of racism. Because racism affects her in the United States, because we turn people who would be considered white in Latin America into an other here. And so it just boggles the mind to me that she can feel that othering and that racism and then turn around and perpetuate it against people who are more marginalized than she is. It's not surprising because white. But it is surprising because it's like, how do you not see that the same thing that you're saying to Black Latino people right now, you're telling them to sit and wait, and now is not the time for them to be represented? First of all, nobody asked you that question. Nobody asked you to speak on this. Nobody asked you to have an opinion. Nobody asked you to say anything. Stephen Colbert tried to open the door and let you out and let this be like, okay, and make it so that you weren't saying the thing that you were clearly saying. And you said, no, I want to be clear. I want the Blacks to wait. I want them to get over their anger of not being seen in their home countries or abroad, and I want them to shut up and wait. Would that not be the same thing that people were saying to her as a Latin American actress in the United States, working in the 50s and 60s? And Mama is talented. I'm pissed at the things that she has said. I think they're disgusting, quite frankly. But let's not front. She's talented. She can sing, she can dance, and she can act. Triple threat, EGOT, all of those things. And she would be marginalized just the same way I'm sure a bunch of Black, Dominican, Cuban, Puerto Rican, maybe even Haitian and Colombian and Venezuelan and Brazilian actresses in the audition room with Melissa Barrera were marginalized. Not because they weren't talented, but because they didn't have the look that the producers were going for this film. They didn't think that this would be marketable to the Latin American community. It gets at this invisibilization of Black Latina people, not just in the US, but also in their home countries. People act like they don't exist. When you look at the numbers statistically, when you think about the amount of enslaved people who were trafficked to the US versus to Latin America, exponential differences. So many more enslaved people went straight to Latin America, and so few of them were eventually sent up to the US. Like, the difference is huge. Even with like countries like Brazil and Dominican Republic having blanqueamiento and branqueamiento, which is like whitening campaign, that was a government policy in a lot of Latin American countries. And even with that, there are still so many Black people there. I'm pretty sure the country with the second highest population of Black people outside of Nigeria in Africa is Brazil. There are so many Black people in Latin America. My friend said this in a group chat and I tweeted about it. Latin America is African as fuck, because the way that slavery existed there was very different from the way it existed in the US. But when you're talking about like English, Anglo-centric slavery, Dutch slavery, break the soul of the human being. Tell them they can't speak their language anymore. Tell them they can't do their cultural practices anymore. They can't practice their religion anymore. Sever them from anything that would make them human in an effort to turn them into an animal. Did it work? No, because there's still Black people living and thriving all throughout the United States and in England and in the Caribbean. But that was the plan. That's what they did. There are the whole maroon communities within Brazil, within Jamaica, within like all of these places of African people who were able to escape their captors and set up communities away from where the colonizers were living and have their African traditions thrive. We have practices. There are practices in Latin America that people take such pride in that exist because the people who were enslaved there did the work and went to the trouble of trying to preserve their African heritage. There's a reason that Santeria exists. There's a reason that bachata exists. There's a reason that reggaeton exists. There's a reason that candomblé and capoeira exist in Latin America and thrived in Latin America. Rumba from Cuba, the government was trying to destroy it for half of the 20th century because they didn't want Negro music.
Nega music.
In their country. And all of these things are things that people in Latin America rightly should take pride in because they're beautiful aspects of their culture. But you can't then say these things that came from Africa are great. These things that are visible to the outside world, to the Americans and the Europeans or whatever that are praised by them are great. But the people whose ancestors preserved them and made them possible to exist are not. Since the Bush administration, really, there's been such a whitewashing of the immigrant narrative from Latin America to the United States. The immigrants that you saw there's a reason that Washington Heights is so Black, because the immigrants that you saw coming here in the 60s and 70s and 50s were Black people from the Caribbean. And we have this narrative now that a Latin American person looks a specific way, that they are light-skinned or mestiza or Native American, and just completely wash over and elide the millions of Black people that live in Latin America, that live in the United States who are from Latin America. It's something that I can't... It feels like if one group of Black people is invisible, then we're all invisible. I don't know what the solution here is. Like, I don't know what to do to fix this problem, to make this better. But I do think that, like, I think it takes an we have to restructure the way that we look at Latina people in the US. And in turn, like, white and mestiza Latina people need to restructure the way that they think of themselves in the United States, because yes, you do face racism. Yes, you are oppressed in very specific ways in the United States. But that doesn't mean that you can then turn around and perpetuate, like, don't punch down immediately, like, as you were climbing up, you know? Don't turn around and then say the Black people who are from the same country as me don't deserve the attention that I deserve. They don't deserve the representation that I deserve. Because right now it feels like there's two Latin Americas. There is the Latin America where light-skinned, mixed-race people exist. And then there's the Latin America where Black people exist and never the twain shall meet. Rita Moreno's comment feels like she's saying it's not that like, nobody wants to see that Latin America. Nobody wants to see the legacy of our slavery. Nobody wants to see the legacy of the pain that we've inflicted. We want to see the fun, cute, marketable Latin America. I think that we need to restructure the way that we think about Latin American identity in the US. It's not a racial category, you know. It doesn't mean like generic brown person who speaks Spanish. It's an ethnic category within which a lot of different racial groups can exist. Within that ethnic category, the racial groups that might be oppressed by white people in the US can also oppress the Black people that are in the same ethnic group, you know? So me as a Black person, as a Black African American person, I am trying to stand in solidarity with Black Latin American people and just say, like, I see you. I know you exist. I know you exist. I swear to God, I probably have some cousins in Brazil. Like, not even that far away. Like, third, second cousins in Brazil. Because slavery wasn't that long ago. Like, you can't just pretend that slavery ended and then all of these people disappeared and they no longer exist anymore. We have to reckon with that. And reckoning with that is recognizing their existence and recognizing the role that you play in their oppression, Rita Moreno. That's all I really have to say about this whole issue. Let me know what you think about this. But yeah, if you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. Like I said at the beginning, I make videos about books, movies, TV, really anything that I feel like talking about in the moment. And oh yeah, I don't know if I said this in my last video, if I've announced this anywhere, but I started a tarot channel. So if you are into all things mystical, you can head over to that channel. It is called The Catholic Mystic Tarot. It will be linked in the description down below, along with my tarot website where I am selling personal readings. You can go over there and check those out, see if you're interested in buying one from me. I have such a fun time doing them, so I really encourage you to get one. Wish me luck with this fucking quarantine, because I am so bored, and when I'm bored, I like want to eat McDonald's more than anything. Is that weird? Is that like a weird Pavlovian response to have? I don't know. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I'm still sad about Rita Moreno. Bye.